this Easter Sunday from our risen Lord and Savior. Amen. I don't think we could make this up if we tried. Easter Sunday this year, we're not just celebrating Easter, it's April Fool's Day. The snow yesterday? Come on, no joke. The real joke is that I've got tickets for the opener of the Twins on Thursday. You chuckle. You know what the forecast is? 35 degrees. And somebody just told me that the forecast is for more snow this week. This will be the first baseball game that I can think of that I'll be in a snowmobile suit. I've been to football games in snowmobile suits, never a baseball game. That's the real joke of April Fool's. April Fool's Day. No joke. It's on Easter Sunday this year. Where did we get April Fool's Day from? That is the other joke too. Where did April Fool's Day come from? No one quite knows. There's the other joke. History.com tells us that no one can quite pinpoint when this practice kind of came into being. As far as we know, April Fool's, and as we enjoy it these days, it started around 1700 in England when people decided on the 1st of April to start playing practical jokes on each other. Even in 1700s England, before they had sprayers on their sinks and would rubber band them for unsuspecting people cleaning dishes, right? But April Fool's Day apparently even goes back farther than that and might have started somewhere around 1582. That year, France was switching calendars from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. What that meant was that New Year's Day was going to be celebrated on the 1st of January versus the middle part of March. And as news did not travel like it does these days instantaneously, there were people around the outer parts of France who didn't get the news that the calendar had switched. And so they kept celebrating New Year's in the middle of March while everybody else around Paris was celebrating it on January 1st. And so what started happening is, because of that switch to New Year's Day, people would start to poke fun at those folks out in the outer parts of France who hadn't quite caught up. That is perhaps where April Fool's Day got its true origin. But as I say, there's the joke. Nobody quite knows. Nobody can pinpoint. Which brings us to today. April Fool's Day, which happens to fall on Easter Sunday. And as we've been doing throughout the season of Lent, throughout Holy Week, we have been going through a series here called Good God. We have been taking this two-word phrase that we have said throughout time, and we have been punctuating it in different ways. And depending on the punctuation mark that we use with those two words, it says a lot about the nature of our God, and it also says a lot about our faith in that God. And so we have used a slash, we've used a period, we have used an asterisk, we've used an asterism, we've used punctuation marks that are very common, some that are very obscure. And today, we round out this whole series with this punctuation mark called an interrobang. It sounds like a joke. It sounds as if I'm playing an April Fool's prank on you, and I assure you I am not. I'm standing in God's house. I will not play jokes on you. 1962, a guy by the name of Martin K. Spector is an ad executive. And as he is looking at the print ads that he produces for his clients, he realizes that there are times when people want to ask rhetorical but declarative questions. And the way that they have to punctuate that is not with one punctuation mark like we do most other things, but in order to do that, you have to do it with two punctuation marks. And Martin K. Spector says there's got to be a better way. And so if you want to ask an emphatic rhetorical question, Martin K. Spector in 1962 came up with one mark to be used instead of the two, called the interrobang. And so, for example, a rhetorical emphatic question would be if you are a parent and your daughter comes to you and declares to you that she and her husband are going to have your first grandchild. A declarative question with an interrobang would be, you're expecting? The rhetorical part of that question is, no duh, that's what she just told you, right? You're expecting? Let me tell you again. Yes, I'm expecting. It's rhetorical because it doesn't require an answer. It's obvious. But you ask the question not expecting an answer, But in that case, what you're doing is you're doing it in a very excited, declarative kind of way. You're expecting. And what Spector said was, the way we usually have to punctuate that is with a question mark followed by an exclamation. And for a guy in print media, an advertising exec, that was too much. And so what he wanted to do is he wanted to create a mashup. You see it here on the right. One character to do both things. And so if you find out that you're going to Disney World for the first time, and you say, "Are you serious?" Well, yeah, I just told you we're going to Disney World. I'm not playing a joke. Interrobang. That's the punctuation mark that you would use. The interrobang actually gets its name, the Latin, which means rhetorical question, interro, and bang is a slang word that used to be used in advertising for an exclamation point. Interrobang, a rhetorical question, exclamation point mashed up. And for a while in the 1960s, this character started to gain a little bit of traction. There were some typewriters, and again, yes, I said typewriter. There were some typewriters in the 1960s that started putting that character in its typeset so that you could just use one character instead of the two. There are some organizations, the National Endowment for the Arts, before it became a different name, used an interrobang in their logo. Hasn't been used a lot, and in fact, it fell out of usage pretty much by the time the 1970s, 1980s rolled around, and you will not find a computer keyboard that has it on it at all. But the interrobang, there it is. And so she couldn't believe it. Mary Magdalene, on that Sunday morning, goes out to the tomb. And for what reason? Don't know. She goes out to the tomb because, who knows? There's no reason to go out there. Jesus is dead. He died 3 days before. Once you're dead, you're dead. But she goes out there. Maybe she just wants to be close to the place where his dead body lays. Maybe she wants to simply be in a quiet place because the disciples are still huddled together in the room. They're scattered around Jerusalem, not knowing what to do in the wake of all the events from the previous week. Regardless of the reason, by the time Mary gets there, she can't believe it. Because what's happened according to John? What's happened is by the time she gets there, she realizes that the stone's been rolled away. And that can only mean one thing. Someone has somehow rolled away that massive stone, and they've taken Jesus' body as just another way to twist it into the disciples and into Mary's heart a little bit further. Mary runs back to Peter and to John, to the rest of the disciples. She says, they've taken the Lord out of the tomb. We don't know where they put him. And notice the exclamation point here. This is a woman who now is in a state of abject desperation. She is absolutely beside herself, doesn't know what to do, can't make sense out of what has happened. And of course, as we know the story, Peter, John, and Mary run back to the tomb. They confirm the worst. Peter and John go back, and then Mary stays. Again, why? Don't know. But she hangs back at the tomb. And what's interesting at this point is she begins to cry, which is understandable. But what ends up happening at this point is confusing. Perhaps it's because she's crying so hard and the tears are blurring her eyes so much that she can't really make out truly what's in front of her. Because as John tells us, there are two angels sitting, one at the head and one at the foot of where Jesus was laying. And they're angels, folks. One would think that if you're looking at them, you would realize these are not the kind of people you just saw in Jerusalem. But Mary can't make that distinction. She looks at these two guys and they ask her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And again, rhetorical question, I hope, because really? Woman, why are you crying? Duh. Why would she be crying? And then what happens is, on the heels of that, she ends up hearing a guy behind her. She thinks he's a gardener who's there tending the area around the tomb that Joseph of Arimathea had given them. And he turns around and he asks her the same basic question. "Woman, why are you crying?" And you've got to imagine that at this point, Mary is saying to herself, "Come on. Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for? I don't know. The guy who was here. And so what we've got at this point in the story, my friends, is all these question marks. You've got this woman who absolutely is beside herself. She has run back to the disciples and with an exclamation point has declared the absolute depth of her pain and her hopelessness, her worst fears realized, and now she gets all these question marks. She's back at this place for what reason? Maybe just to be close to him, where his body was. And you know what? She's going to hang out there for a while, and now these people have all these questions. Which Mary turns on the gardener. Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for? And this is Mary's no duh kind of statement to the man. Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I'll get him. This is not a woman to be trifled with now. She's had it. And what we've got at this point in the story are question marks that are now being mashed up against the exclamation points of Mary in her hopelessness. And what ends up happening? There comes this moment, this one perfect mark in time where the question marks and the exclamation points mash up into this perfect punctuation mark in real time. Jesus said to her, Mary. And she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. And the way the Bible punctuates Rabboni is with a period. But I would argue, my friends, on this Easter Sunday, we would be wise to punctuate Mary's response with an interrobang. It hardly gets used anymore. And yet what an interrobang does is it is this perfect compilation of one mark out of two. One mark that simultaneously has the ability to take a question and turn it into an emphatic declaration all in a blink of an eye. And this is what Mary does in response to Jesus saying her name. In one mark, Mary's response shows us that Mary goes instantaneously from a place where there's only a slight, if even that kind of possibility, and it makes it into an ironclad truth. It moves her from being a person that doesn't possibly think that something could be. Because as Kara said to the kids, dead people don't rise. It doesn't happen. And it moves her in that instantaneous moment from what couldn't be to the most real thing that she's ever experienced. This is precisely what happens to Mary in that one perfect mark in time. She was moved to what couldn't possibly be, to the most real thing she had ever experienced in her life to that point. And the interrobang is what declares that. In this one inflection, Rabboni, Mary was instantaneously moved from asking a question to making a declaration of ironclad faith. Mary, right there, can't help herself. Her life has changed in the blink of an eye, even less than that. My friends, that's what this is still all about. Why do we get together on a day like today, especially since it's April Fool's Day? Why do we get together on a day, as Kara told the kids, when we could rightly sleep in? And you know what? Only guys like me have to come to church on Sunday. Why? Because I'm working, right? It still matters, folks. This is what it's still about. What this is all about, the reason why we mark this day in history, is that it still is all about taking in one moment everything that is impossible, and in the next moment, not just making it something possible, but a promise made real. Instantaneously, what couldn't been becomes the greatest truth we've ever known. It still is about the mark that was in his hands on Friday, in his feet on Friday, and they were still there on Sunday. They stayed there throughout the days that he continued to walk on earth, and they will always be there as a sign of the cost he was willing to pay for every single one of us here today. This is what Easter is still about. This is why it still matters. It's about taking what has always been, and especially in our world today, is still a question mark. especially in our day. Only Jesus. Is Jesus really the only way? Come on. There got to be other. And instantaneously what it does is it takes us from still dealing with question marks to flipping that and making it an emphatic declaration. Really? Only Jesus? Only Jesus. It still is about helping others to hear what really is an impossible story, an incredible story. Doesn't make any sense. Again, what Kara said, people don't rise from the dead. And as the religious leaders would try to do over the coming days, they would try to debunk what had happened. They would try to undermine what had happened because it's not supposed to happen. God doesn't work in that way. It still is about helping others to hear not an incredible story, but the most credible story that has ever been told and retold. And we tell that most credible story, hoping that others have an Interrobang kind of moment where their question about only Jesus immediately gets switched into an exclamation of faith. Only Jesus. He's risen, he is risen. And so we end this whole series. These two simple words, good God. And we punctuate them in all these different ways. With a slash, with an asterisk, with a period. And today we punctuate it with an Interrobang. And we do it on a day that we couldn't have made up had we tried. We celebrate this most credible story on a day that we usually set aside for foolishness and pranks. Good God? Good God. No joke. I will agree with you. Amen. I'll invite you all to please stand.